Welcome to the Self-Control Show, a podcast for men. If you get defensive, shut down, or find yourself going 0 to 100, you're in the right place. Most men were never taught how to regulate their emotions. And this show is about changing that. It's not therapy, and it's not fluff. It's training. I'm your host, Jason Schnitzer. Let's get to work. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the show. Got another great one for you today. And the topic that we are going to talk about, or I guess I'm going to talk about, is why your wife doesn't trust you anymore. And I know that you are probably like me in that you think like there's not really a good reason why she might not trust you. And why would anybody think that you're untrustworthy? You know, you're not really doing anything bad, right? You're not cheating. You're not maliciously lying. You're trying really hard. You're a good dude, right? But there's just this element that she just doesn't believe you anymore, right? When you say something, it's kind of like, kind of like it's almost like a glancing blow. It doesn't really sink in for her. And probably one of the most defining personality traits or things that a man like that's really in his power can do that he has control of, right? It's not making a lot of money, not planning awesome vacations. It's not anything really grandiose. It's one thing. And what that boils down to is you doing what you say you're going to do, right? And then following through, right? Saying you're going to do something and then following through. What happens in little moments and sometimes big moments is this vicious cycle, vicious pattern that can also be labeled by a death by a thousand cuts, where, in a hard moment, right, where your wife's upset, or maybe even one of your kids are upset, right, or you're getting into a heated debate or discussion with your wife, what it can sound like is, oh, I'll take care of that. I'll change. I won't do that again. I'll do better, right? Can we just move on? And in that moment, you really mean those things that you say. Like, I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. And again, you really mean that in the moment. But there's a reason why you say those things so readily in the moment, right? And I guess before I kind of get into this, I'll kind of name the pattern, right? And it could kind of be labeled as like an appeasement pattern or a peacekeeping pattern, right? We just kind of want to keep the peace. So we say the thing in the moment that maybe sounds right or feels right, but that's kind of the trap that we get into, is we say something in the moment that, although we really mean it in the moment, we aren't really considering the whole picture, right? It's the thing, it's like we're signing up for something and we're not reading the fine print. And the problem happens is in those hard moments, we overpromise, and as lives, we get overwhelmed, right? From our job, from our kids, from all the things going on. And of course, these promises that we made in the moments, and we don't have the right support. So what happens is ultimately we forget about it or avoid it, right? And then it happens again, inevitably. And then what happens? The same thing. We overpromise, we get overwhelmed, and then we avoid. Overpromise, overwhelm, avoid again and again and again, right? And the reason why we do that in the moment, typically, right, and this was what it was for me, is like I wanted the tension to stop, right? I didn't want her to be upset, right? We had just gone so long with everything being good. Oh, I just didn't want this to ruin the weekend. Maybe it was a Friday. I didn't want to ruin the weekend, right? Or, you take it on as a failure, right? Because your wife's unhappy, your kids are unhappy, whether you know it or not. It's like, oof, this is proof that I failed or I didn't do good enough. And, again, plain and simply, just to get out of an uncomfortable moment. So maybe you say yes instead of saying no, and you just agree. And again, we agree and we sign up for things that we might not have the capacity for. And that becomes, again, a vicious cycle. So overpromising in the moment, and then we get overwhelmed, right? Life hits, you start to procrastinate, you think about the thing, It's like I don't even know where to begin. And like, a lot of times what goes hand in hand with this, like I talked about on a different podcast, is men typically, we don't ask for help for the thing. So then not only are we overwhelmed, but we're overwhelmed alone, right? So we procrastinate, of course, because we're overwhelmed and we're alone in it. And then ultimately your hope fades and you avoid it, right? And you hope that she's not going to remember, right? But the problem is it doesn't go away, right? What happens is now she feels that you are just going to tell her what she wants to hear, as opposed to like what you're really feeling or the truth. And also, the story and the belief that she starts to have about you is that like, he just never follows through. Why should I believe him? And what happens is the trust erodes, right? And of course, there are going to be like really good reasons why you might not have done something, right? Once, twice, maybe 100 times. But like I said before, this becomes a death by a thousand cuts. And ultimately, what happens is when there is no consistency, there is no trust. And sometimes it even feels like betrayal, right? Like, I can't trust you. Why? Why am I not important enough for you to follow through? Right? There are so many different things that could potentially be going through her head. Now she feels about it because this is something that was a big deal for her, whatever the thing is, right? And we say, hey, don't worry, I got it. Or don't worry, it won't happen again, or I'll change, right? And it doesn't. And time again. And sometimes because it's hard in those moments, because depending on what it's around, there could be a lot of charged feelings, right? And defensiveness, right, is a very common response that we can have. We can justify why we did or didn't do things. And I always like to take it out of context, right? And most guys get this analogy that I like to use. I'm like, think about it. If you told a client, right, or a customer or your boss that something would be done at a certain time and there was expectations and what that was going to include or not include, and then you didn't follow through and you didn't do it, right? What would your client say if you were a customer to a business that told you, hey, it'll be done by this date, right? Or you came back to them and was like, hey, this, I didn't like this. Can you make a change? And they said, yeah, no problem. And you come back a week later and still nothing was done about it. How would that impact you? Right. And if you can just sit for a second and then put yourself kind of in that situation, and that is basically what your wife is experiencing in those hard moments, right? And I don't say this to say like you're a bad guy, by the way. A lot of times like we do this and we don't even realize it. And this isn't like a character flaw issue. This is a regulation issue, right? Because a lot of times in those moments, in those hard moments when our wife is triggered, upset, not happy, right? Maybe she's expressed this a lot. So the way in which she's sharing comes across as critical, right? But whether or not, but sometimes not, sometimes she's just like trying to share feedback and she's not trying to be critical, but it comes off as criticism to your system, right? Your system sees that as a threat, hears that as a threat, feels that as a threat. And what that can sound like internally for you, the stories and the beliefs that you might have is like, oh, here we go again. Not good enough. Nothing's ever good enough, right? Sense of rejection, potentially, you could be feeling, right? Sense of pressure, right? And really what happens to have you say the thing in the moment where you believe it, but then is the part that causes the overpromising is your nervous system's basically saying like, hey, make this stop. This is really sucky, right? So do whatever it takes adaptively to agree, sometimes not agree, right? But ultimately, what it is like you're saying something that's like not true for you in the moment, like a temporary fix that comes back to bite you long term, right? Because a lot of times, and sometimes you could call this appeasement, right? Kind of telling somebody what they want to hear, right? Or basically, being adaptive, right? There are some therapeutic modalities that would call this like an adaptive child part of you that could come in and just say what needs to be said because you're afraid of the disconnection in the relationship, right? That can feel better than like standing firm. What your system again is saying that, hey, short-term peace is all that matters right now. But the problem happens is when that short-term peace creates long-term distrust, right? It's kind of like, eating a chocolate every day, right? It's like, oh, just a little bit, right? Just a little bit. But over time, that can have a really big impact on, your health. And again, that's kind of the real cost there. Not kind of, that is the real cost, right? Your words basically lose weight with your wife. It's kind of like your current trust is like currency, right? And the exchange rate just drops when there's distrust, when you don't follow through, when you say something and then your actions don't match, right? Because a lot of times, like earlier on in the relationship, we can say something and their actions don't match, and like you're kind of in the honeymoon phase and everybody's like, it's okay, right? But over time, again, death by a thousand cuts, it becomes all of a sudden it's like you said you're going to take the trash out and you didn't take it out, right? And it's the end of the world. And there's these little nothing fights that you start getting into, and it's so easy again in this pattern and cycle to get defensive about those things and not really being able to shift and see what's underneath it, right? Is like years a lot of times of this like little tiny distrusts that add up, and then eventually the dam breaks over the trash not being taken out, right? So the shift happens when you start to see the pattern for what it is, right? You start to notice your activation. You start to notice how long you've had that adaptation, right? And asking for a minute, right? One of the best things that you can do in a heated argument is to say, hey, you know what? I just need a minute to process this. Give me a minute, right? Take a few deep breaths, right? Naming it if you're like feeling like you're a little overwhelmed, or if that in that moment isn't a good moment to have a hard conversation, right? Letting your partner know that you just don't have the capacity right now, and scheduling a time that you will come back to review the thing that you're talking about, not just to avoid it, right? And sometimes, depending on how you process, it could be helpful to verbally process. I'm a big verbal processor, so I need to like talk about things out loud to really think things through. And if you are just like so far down this rabbit hole or in this cycling pattern, what you want to do is take very small bites, right? And that's like you want to under promise, right? And over deliver, right? You want following through to be super, super easy for you, right? Really low hanging fruit. And it's not about your intentions, right? Yeah, you didn't mean for this to happen, right? It's about how your actions have impacted your wife and their relationship, right? And trust is built on consistency, not your intention, right? Again, consistency being what do you say you're going to do and what you actually do, right? So, really, the question you need to ask yourself in those situations, if you're not sure if this is you or not, which I would assume if you've listened this far, there's some resonance. But like in a situation when you're thinking about it afterwards, right? Ideally, in the moment, ask yourself, like, are you just trying to keep the peace, right? Or are you trying to build trust here, right? Is ultimately a decision you have to make, because those two things are not the same, and a lot of times are in direct battle and conflict with one another. And when you're able to maintain a level of regulation, right, where your nervous system is not signaling too much threat, where you collapse into this adaptive sort of response and you just say whatever it is in the moment and not really having thought it through. What we want to do is be able to regulate that so it's not so activating, so that your system doesn't feel so threatened, so you can receive feedback, get to what's underneath it for her, right? And understand what's underneath it for you with regards to like why you're doing the thing. So as you move forward, right, what we want to do is shift your trajectory, because nobody needs you to be perfect, right? What we want to see is effort and understanding and being able to actually back things up with behavioral change. And again, this is the kind of thing that I live, breathe, talk about all the time. If this is you, if you resonate with any of this, man, I'd sure love to talk to you. That's why I offer my free call. So check the links below in the summary, or check me out on Instagram, Jason Schnitzer Coaching. Sure glad that you're here. Glad that you're listening. Always, if you want to hear about a certain topic too, by the way, feel free to message me on Instagram. Love getting feedback from listeners to dive deeper on and to answer any questions that you guys have. So thanks again for tuning in. Catch you on the next one.